Well, on behalf of MyTac, I want to welcome Dan Whalen today, the cookbook author and creator of The Food in My Beard. What a perfect day for a cooking class. It's such a great autumn day. Oh, it's just so beautiful and clear out today. Today, Dan is going to explore with us the fine tips of how to make sweet potato gnocchi with kale and mushrooms from scratch, how to try things out in the kitchen, not be afraid of doing so, and taking us on a great culinary journey with sweet potatoes. So, Dan, if you could, yeah, we're ready to explore in your kitchen. So thank you
Great.
so much for the talk today.
Great. Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. It's going to be really fun. This is definitely one of my favorite fall dishes, even though I did just move to Ohio from Boston. So it like weirdly feels like a summer day here, even though it's been very like cold and dreary the past few weeks. But I guess I'm just explaining my short sleeve. But I'm excited for this recipe. I love working with sweet potatoes this time of the year. I love making any sort of pasta. And I love telling people that it's actually not really as hard to sometimes make pasta as maybe you think. And gnocchi is a great sort of like entry level, easy thing to do without having to roll out a bunch of pasta with your pasta maker. So about me, like you said, I'm a cookbook author and blogger. I've been blogging for about 12, 13 years on my website. I have 4 cookbooks out. One's about tater tots, one's about s'mores. I'm writing my 5th book right now about having nachos for dinner. And gnocchi are kind of just like another version of a tater tot in a way, right? But I did want to say to everyone, feel free to ask questions throughout as opposed to saving them to the end, because that will give me some topics to chat about that maybe you want to hear about rather than me just like rambling about what I think you might want to hear. So I'm going to get started. And I have the potatoes here that I've cooked already. And I just roasted them in the oven for about like 40 minutes or so. These are smaller ones, so that's all they take. But you can usually just touch it like this to see when it's done if it feels soft. Uh, a lot of people would boil potatoes, sweet potatoes, or regular potatoes for making either a mashed potato or a gnocchi dish. But I like to roast them because I feel like it concentrates the potato flavor and you don't lose a lot of that flavor in the water itself. And that's kind of my philosophy for almost any cooking. I don't usually boil much. Like a lot of people will blanch things like broccoli or spinach, but I don't like to do that myself. I think you're losing a lot of what makes the vegetable good right in the water. So in the recipe that I wrote for this, I listed, I think, 3 large sweet potatoes. These are more like medium sized. And then the amount of flour I put, it's like a pretty small amount of flour, I would say. You're going to need more. But when you cook with something like potato, the moisture level is different every time you're going to cook with it. So you really should never just blindly follow a recipe. You're going to need maybe more or less flour as you go, because the dough needs to be like the right consistency. And if there's too much water in the potatoes or not enough, uh, it's going to change. And it's a lot easier to add flour to something like this than to add moisture to it. So start low and keep adding a little bit and experimenting that way. So I added the egg to this first. And that's just kind of like when you're following most baking recipes, you're going to want to do like the liquid and the dry separate, kind of the similar philosophy. I want this all sort of incorporated together. And if I was making regular potato gnocchi, I usually use a potato ricer, which is like kind of like a pump that makes sure all the pieces are broken up. But with sweet potatoes, they kind of just like fall apart on their own. So you don't really need to do that. So like I said, the potatoes and flour are in here, and hopefully we're gonna have a somewhat good moisture level, and then we'll just keep adding a little bit of flour until we get to the right level. And I think the secret with gnocchi is, and one of the reasons why I start with lower flour and keep adding it, is you want it to taste like potato. You don't want it to just be full of flour. You want it to be soft and pillowy when you eat it. So the idea is you want to get the least amount of flour in here, but not such a little amount that it doesn't hold together or becomes too sticky when you're trying to roll it out. And I'm a very hands-on cook, but I know a lot of people would prefer maybe using a tool for this. But I think when you're working with any dough, like I do a lot of bread baking and pizza making, I think feeling it in your fingers is a great way to know about the moisture itself.
Dan, that's what the dough right now is, just the sweet potato, flour, and egg. Is that right?
Yep, that's it.
Wow.
And I did actually salt the potatoes before, but we do need to add a little more salt. And thank you for reminding me about that. A lot of people also say, when you're making pasta, like the best way to season it is to season the cooking water heavily. But when you're making your own pasta, you can also season the dough itself.
All right, Dan, we have a question from Henriette. It asks if it is possible to use boiled sweet potatoes.
Yes, it's definitely possible. And it's a more traditional way of doing it. But the potatoes themselves are going to have even more moisture than when you bake them. So you'll need more flour. And the reason I like to roast them is because you're losing a little bit of the potato flavor in the water. So I want a concentrated potato flavor.
Great.
And the texture we're looking for in this is kind of like a Play-Doh, I guess. If you were doing a regular pasta, it would be a little stiffer, thicker. This one, you want it to be a little softer.
It reminds me, Dan, of sweet dough. I do a lot of bread, and it's is it like a sweet dough consistency?
Do you mean? I'm not sure what like a sweet dough technically is.
Okay.
My bread baking is usually like sourdough and pizza.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So it does help to let it rest a little bit. You don't need to, but it's helpful. So I have rested this for a little bit. And what you want to do is cut off like a more manageable chunk. You don't want to do this all at once. And then roll it out again, very similar to Play-Doh, in a snake sort of log.
Another question, Vika asks if it's possible to use almond flour or any other kind of flour.
I've done this with a handful of different flours. Almond tastes good, but I think you don't really want it to be the only flour. If I were trying to make this gluten-free, I probably would do a mix of like an all-purpose gluten-free flour combined with almond flour to get the flavor as well as some of the stickiness and sort of necessary gluten that you need. Not like actual gluten, but the the connections in the dough that you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes like when I used a certain flour once, they looked so good and I was really excited, and I put them in the boiling water and they all just completely fell apart in the water. So you don't want that. And this is speaking of gluten, I did work this dough more than I maybe wanted to because I'm having a little bit of trouble rolling it out. But that's fine. It happens sometimes, and you just keep going and eventually you will get there. Because if I hadn't put enough flour in, then this would just be sticking or not really coming together in that sense. So you kind of have to balance what you want to do with it. But again, this all relates to just like not being as afraid. As long as you have the tools in your head to do stuff like this, and you taste as you go, it shouldn't, like, you're going to end up with something good. And even if this like didn't fully work, you still could boil it kind of like bigger dumplings or something and still get the flavor from it, and toss it with the same sauce if you wanted to. I know it's harder for some people to experiment when you're like cooking a meal for your family. But I mean, the other day I made some chili that was a little too spicy for my wife, but then we just got takeout after. All right, so this is almost getting thin enough here. And what I'm doing here is just kind of like stretching it out with my hand since it's not rolling as well. This is a fun project to also do with people. Especially if you're trying to make a bunch, like if you're doing pasta or ravioli or something. In my family, we make tortellini for Christmas every year. And we get together with a handful of people and just like make a ton of them. And it's become like a fun family tradition.
Yeah,
So-
Henriette also comments that for some people, I find myself included in this, it's scary to not just follow the recipe exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, and like I said, I do get that. But as long as you taste things, like with baking, it's tougher because you don't want it to fall apart or like completely not work. But with most cooking, as long as you taste as you go, it's not going to end up bad necessarily if you're putting all good things in it that go together. As long as you just like maybe before you add that sauce, put a little bit with like what you're doing in a smaller bowl and then add it. And that way you can see how it tastes before you put it into the entire pot, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Good advice.
So I have just a fork here, and I'm going to put that piece down and press with my thumb and kind of roll it off like that. And that's how you get the classic gnocchi shape.
Your video has frozen for me again. Just in time for the gnocchi shaping. There you go.
All right.
Looks to be working
I
again.
think what's happening is it just kind of times out.
Yeah,
if I
exactly.
switch.
I think that might be it. So
If I keep this window open instead of the other window, that might work.
okay, give
Can
it a
you hear
shot,
me?
and then
Good?
I'll let you know
cool.
again if it drops out.
Okay, so rolling it off the fork like that. And they don't have to be perfect. And they will also smooth out a little in the boiling water. So I'm going to take this piece here, put it down. Sometimes I just dip my thumb in the flour. It's okay if it sticks to the fork a little bit. It's less okay if it sticks to your thumb. And if it's too thin like that, you just kind of smush it together. It'll thicken up. And this is just kind of something that you can sit here and do for a little bit. And as you go, you'll get a lot better with each one. And you'll also get faster as you do it. I think when I try to convince people to make pasta, I like to say it's easier than you maybe think it is, but there is a little bit of a learning curve. So like the first time you try it, you might get frustrated, but like the second or third time you try it, you'll actually like feel really good about it. So these look all right. And like I said, they will smooth out a little bit in the water. And what you would do is just keep doing this. Repeat sort of with the next dose. But I made a bunch before we started, so I wouldn't have to just keep doing this. Great. And you know, if you don't like the fork technique, I've made just round ones before. The point of this, and this one actually looks really good. The point of this is that the sauce is supposed to really like stick to it a little bit better. But if you want instead, you just could roll it up into a ball like that. And I've definitely made them like that before as well. And it actually looks kind of cool too. So it depends on what else you're serving with it. That to me, like I mean, obviously because I take pictures of food, I have to think about how the dish looks in the end. And that would inform my decision of how to make the shape of these. And also when you get those odds and ends of it, you can just put it right back like in the pile of dough and then re-roll it out later. And what can be fun also is when you make these with people, like each person has their own style kind of, and as you're eating the final dish together, people will be like, oh, I can tell that one's mine, I can tell that one's yours kind of. So it can be a fun little almost competition of who makes the most perfect ones. And anytime, oh, you have a question or?
Oh yeah. We noticed that the tray that's on is the gnocchi's on a towel.
Yeah,
So-
I was just gonna mention that.
Great.
Any time you're making pasta, the dough is like wet enough still that it could stick. So if I were to put that on my countertop, because it's not really breathable, the pasta would stick to it. And then when I went to pick it up, it would be stuck to the counter and kind of like stretch out like a piece of melted cheese. So always put it down on a towel like this with some flour, and that's gonna help you. And if you're doing something like tortellini, that I've mentioned we do all the time, you can't really over flour it because we cook it right in the soup broth. So we have to kind of let them dry out without too much flour, or else the soup would be kind of a gross texture with all that loose flour floating around. Whereas with most pasta and gnocchi, we're gonna cook this in boiling water, not in the food that we're like eating it in. So it doesn't matter if, as a sort of safety net, a training wheel, you just put so much flour on this because it's going to help you in the end, and it's not going to affect the final dish. So I just have some water here boiling, and I'm going to move this and get the other ingredients out there. When you make homemade pasta like that, you know, it only will need to boil for a very short amount of time. I think it'll probably start floating after 2 minutes or so. And then it only needs like, depending on how big it is, only needs like a minute or so after that. So you want to make all the sauce and everything first, because the one good key to any pasta making is when the pasta comes out of the boiling water, you want it to hit the sauce as soon as possible, because at that point it's trying to like take in, just like it took in the water in the pot, it wants to take in any sort of flavors. So hitting the sauce right away is going to let the flavor really get into the pasta itself. So I just have some mushrooms here. And for me, cleaning mushrooms, I usually just use a dry paper towel and wipe off some of the dirt. Some people would prefer to wash it, and I've read some articles, like there was kind of like a old-fashioned rumor that if you washed mushrooms, they would be just kind of like gummy and gross, which has kind of been like disproven, I guess. If you just give them a quick rinse, it's fine. But I prefer to try to leave them dry, because ideally with mushrooms, you want them to brown up a little bit in the oil. So the less moisture you have with them, the more likely that they're gonna get like nicely brown and crispy.
Dan, I have a question about storing gnocchi. If you're keeping it raw before you boil it, is it better to freeze it or keep them in the fridge?
I would, if you're making them for today or tomorrow, I would keep them in the fridge. And if you're making them further after that, I would freeze them. And the way we freeze the tortellini every year, and the way we do it is we let them dry a lot on the towels, probably for a couple hours. And then we put them into the freezer on a flat tray after they're pretty dry. And so that way they individually freeze, and then we move them to Ziploc bags so that it's not all frozen in like one big, huge rock of tortellini. So you could definitely do it this exact same way for the gnocchi. And, you know, if you're taking your time to do this, making a big batch sounds like a good idea, because then in another month or so, you're wondering what to make for your meal, and you just make a quick sauce and boil up the homemade gnocchi you have, and there you go. I'm leaving these mushrooms a little chunky. Sometimes I would do thinner slices, but I kind of like the idea of having the big pieces of pasta with the bigger sort of pieces of mushroom. Let me get a bowl. And then I just have some kale here. So I switch between buying kale in like a bag where it's already cut and washed, and then buying the stalks, because the stalks are like so big and bulky and kind of annoying sometimes. Like they won't fit in your bag, or they won't fit in your fridge that well, but they stay fresh and good for so much longer. The pre-washed ones are pretty convenient sometimes too, but other times I feel like I have to wash them again, because they're like, they maybe still have some weird stuff in there, little pieces of dirt that didn't fully get into the leaves. So I'm back onto buying it on the stock because it's fresher. I think better overall, but you lose some of that convenient factor. I'm just gonna roughly chop this. It's almost gonna act more like an herb in this dish than it is as like a big wilted piece. And I think this dish is awesome as a dinner, but it also could be sort of a side dish. And then if you want to add meat to it, which I do sometimes, you can put kale in it, or you can I like to put sausage in the pan first and cook that off a little bit. And that way you start cooking everything with the sausage oils. Get your dish really get started well. I just have a clove of garlic here. You can also grate the garlic if you want, but I like to just slice it thin for this. The thing about garlic is the more you sort of mangle it, the stronger flavored it is. So by slicing garlic thin, this paper isn't coming off. By slicing garlic thin, what you're doing is you're adding more of like a sweet garlic flavor versus if you're grating it into a dish or using a garlic press. Sometimes it can be like that angry, aggressive garlic flavor. And that's, I like doing that for say like salsa because a grated, aggressive raw garlic is perfect in a salsa. But for this dish, we want a more subtle, sweet garlic flavor. Great. Lots of wires going on in this kitchen right now. So I'm putting this on like a medium high-ish. And I just have some butter in here. And then the sauce is mostly going to be butter with just a little bit of cream. But we've been eating a bit less dairy here. So you can definitely substitute. There's a lot of great non-dairy butters. And I'm going to use oat milk today because that's just what we have on hand. So I always think it's good to just use what you have kind of and make things your own. So if you wanted to do just olive oil instead of the butter, that's great. But the sweet potatoes and butter just like really go well together. And my pot of water is boiling. My gnocchi is ready here to drop in. So like I said, only about 3 minutes for that. So we want this to be done first. And this will come together really quick as well.
Henriette asks also about, or what about a mix of oil and butter?
So a lot of people think that if you mix oil and butter, you're going to bring the smoke point of butter down a little bit. But that technically that's not true. The butter is still going to burn at a certain temperature. And so for me, I would rather the flavor of butter, and I like a brown butter flavor too. So to me, it's like, okay, if it gets a little brown, just not burnt, and it goes well with the mushrooms. If you really want to like really sear the mushrooms aggressively, then yes, I would maybe suggest just doing oil first and finishing it with butter. But I'd rather have the butter soaked mushroom flavor.
And then Diane asks if you've used grape oil.
Yeah, is it grapeseed oil normally? That's a great oil for a very neutral flavor and definitely also has a nice high smoke point, so you can really get some browning on the mushrooms with that.
Great.
I have only used this hot pot a few times, so but I think it's getting there now. Just going to add the salt to the boiling water now before I forget later.
Dan, when did you find your passion for cooking and, doing all kinds of creative stuff in the kitchen?
Sure. So I actually went to school for computer science and business. I went to Bentley in Waltham, Massachusetts. And I started working there I started working at an IT help desk. It wasn't what I wanted to do at all after school. And then I just started a website, really. I had made websites with my friend in college. We made little like Flash animations and games and stuff together. And I always just was wondering like what's a cool like blog or website I can do. And I actually ended up moving to Bermuda from Boston. It was there's a big offshore accounting thing going on there, and so having the business school ties and connections, they were able to get me a job out there. And while I was there, I missed a lot of the food and restaurants in Boston. So that's when I started really like tinkering with things, coming up with ideas and new recipes. And at that point, I started putting them on the internet just to basically to remember what I was making. In case maybe if I had people over a few, like a month later, I would remember how I did something or how I made it. And also because some of the recipes I wanted to make, I couldn't even find online at that time, which is so funny to think about now. But that was like 2008, I guess. Now, if you imagine any recipe in the world that you could ever think of, and you think it's the weirdest thing you've ever heard of, if you do a search, you can definitely find it. But yeah, I just kept putting recipes. I just kept putting recipes up. I was using a phone camera, which at that time, phone cameras like you couldn't even see what I was taking pictures of. I was cooking at night, so the photography was really bad. But I ended up getting a DSLR camera within the first few months, and I was cooking more in the daytime, and some of my recipes would start getting seen by more people. I was getting picked up by bigger websites like Serious Eats and some other ones, and slowly just got the bug to keep publishing stuff on the internet as more people saw it. It's kind of like one of those like instant gratification things when you start going viral and you're like, I need more likes. I want to see this. I want to see people seeing it. And it's partly like, I guess, it's a common thing for people who cook to like instant gratification because that's what a lot of chefs will tell you. Like they hand people food and they see people like it immediately. So I think a combination of that stuff just kept me going all this time. And after about 5 or 6 years of the website, I started getting paid off of it and got my first book deal. And a few years later, I was able to quit my job, which I hadn't worked in IT at that point for a while. I was helping out at an ice cream shop. Later on, I was developing burritos for a burrito shop. And then finally, I could go full time with my website, which was about 4 or 5 years ago.
That's great. That's amazing. That's a great story there, Dan. Thank you for
Thanks.
sharing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a long journey, I guess, but really fun. And I actually met my wife through blogging too. We met because we both were Boston-based bloggers, so we would go to the same events and everything. And we just kept talking, and eventually we got married about 2 years ago. Actually, our 2-year anniversary is in a few days.
Great. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So these are starting to go, and you can see some nice brown like here. So as you can see, even if your pan or your burner is kind of slow, as long as you just let it sit and do its thing, you'll get there. You don't want to salt mushrooms right away in the pan. It's another thing that will cause moisture to leak out of the mushrooms. So letting them cook in just the oil for the first few minutes is better. And then normally I would say almost anything you put in the pan, put salt on it immediately. But mushrooms, I usually just wait a minute so that you end up actually sauteing them instead of more of a steam situation with all the moisture that comes out of them. And some people would add the garlic first. But I like to save the garlic. Garlic can get really bitter when it is burnt. And you'll see a lot of recipes that say like, put in the onions and garlic and cook for a while. But I would always add the onions for a bit because they need like 5 minutes. Then add the garlic and do only another minute or so. If you want to think about what the flavor of burnt garlic tastes like, think of like an everything bagel, which is delicious, but not exactly what you want most of the time with your garlic. Can you hear the sizzling on this? I can't hear.
Oh yeah,
Oh, good, good.
sounds
That's-
delicious.
Good. That's why I got this microphone so that everyone could hear everything. But yeah, this is one of those dishes I make every year this time of the year. And what I post on my website is more sort of like over the top stuff. A lot of what I call mashups, where I take 2 different dishes and make 1 new dish out of it. So this isn't the kind of thing that I'm always posting on the website, but it is the type of thing that I love to make, these classic flavors, especially growing up in like an Italian household. Great, I'm gonna add the kale now. And that's gonna wilt down so much. I also just love the colors of this dish too. Like I was saying, how I always am kind of cooking based on like what it's going to look like in the end, because that's the way I kind of have to think about food. Because the only way most people experience my cooking is through the photos, or when they make it themselves, of course. But no one's going to make it themselves if it doesn't look good enough for them to sort of imagine what it would look like if they made it. So now I'm going to put the gnocchi in the water back here, because I know that this is like almost ready for it. Always make sure to stir the pot right when you put the pasta in, no matter what pasta you're making. Garlic's going in here. I keep wanting to pick this up and shake it, but on this burner, it probably is best for me to leave it there. So I chose this place knowing that the kitchen, I was going to be obviously working here a lot, and there's just a whole wall of windows here, and it just makes my life so much easier because, like I mentioned earlier, I was always cooking at night and trying to get a good photo of it back when I first started, and I don't consider myself a photographer, even though it's kind of like the basis of what I do. Um, but the only real true tip that I've learned about taking photos is the lighting. So put me with some food in a dark restaurant and I wouldn't really know the first thing about taking a good photo of it. I just make sure to cook stuff during the day, stand here in the kitchen with all the windows and just take some photos. I mean, of course, I've learned a little bit more about, the aperture of the lens, which affects sort of like the blurry background versus like the super sharp foreground, which you can also do on most phones these days by just using portrait mode. But that kind of stuff really gets people excited about the way that food looks as well. This looks great, and I'm just going to stir in a little bit of that oat milk, and it's going to basically be there to stop the garlic from burning. The gnocchi is like a minute away from being done.
Vika, it looks like she's cooking along with you. She just posted a picture in the chat. She's wondering how much milk you used.
So I'm not making the full recipe that I listed before, but I just put in about a little more than half a cup of this.
Great.
In the recipe that I sent, I think it's a whole cup, but it's probably also like double the amount of gnocchi that that I made. And I'm adding a little bit of parm to the sauce here, help thicken it a little bit. And also the water from the cooking pasta is also going to thicken the sauce as well. All right, so there's that. And I'm just going to use this tool right here to move these directly from one to the other. And with a little bit of the water as well. And then this is just going to kind of come together. The last of the liquid in the sauce is kind of just going to evaporate and everything's going to cling nicely to the pasta itself. And I really think this is just an awesome dish for this time of the year. And I'm going to add a little more cheese because that makes everything better. Almost everything. It's going to help it thicken a little as well. Great. That's it, really. I'm going to grab a plate. Another tip if you want to take photos is like nothing's really going to look great on this plate. So I always have, even if you only have like one or two other plates that's more of like an earthenware, I find that stuff like this works really well. Maybe I'll go here. That's just cheese on it. And this, because it's kind of like textured and not just like a pure white. So the food always looks better in plates like that.
Henriette is wondering if you sometimes add any fresh or dried herbs.
Yes, I sometimes would. However, when I cook with kale, like I have this weird thing about if I'm cooking with spinach or kale, I don't want to add another like green to it for some reason. I'm not sure. To me, the flavors clash a little bit. So this dish, if you weren't going to use kale, it'd be really awesome with oregano. It'd be awesome with basil. I think sage would be incredible. But for my personal taste, I wouldn't put those things in and keep the kale.
Thank you. That looks fantastic.
A little hot. Yeah, it's awesome. It's like nutty flavored. Another thing I forgot to mention actually is some people will cook the gnocchi and then like saute that separately in the butter. Um, but I was more focused on getting the mushrooms perfect that I wanted to. I don't always love to do that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And to me, it's more important to have the browning on the mushrooms in this than it is on the gnocchi itself. And I don't think like sometimes there's steps that just like add a complication that to a recipe that doesn't add enough value in the end that makes it necessarily worth it for me to do it. So yeah, but that's a dish. Let me know if there's any other questions. And also you can follow me on social media. I'm at TFIMB and my website is The Food in My Beard. So the social is like the initials, The Food in My Beard.
Vika's wondering if she doesn't have Parmesan, what other cheese would you recommend adding?
The thing is like the hard cheeses are going to be best for this because you grate it so small and it kind of just like becomes one with the sauce, and the nuttiness of that goes so well with the other flavors in here. So like Pecorino Romano is another similar one. However, you could add like a ton of other cheeses. It just would like totally change the vibe of the dish. But I think like a soft goat cheese would be really awesome in here, or even maybe like balls of fresh mozzarella, or Gruyere maybe, which is actually Gruyere would probably be pretty similar to the Parm because it has that nuttiness to it.
Great. And if everyone wants to take a look in the chat, Anthony just put in several of the links to all of your social channels on your website, so they can all follow your beautiful food images there.
Great. Great, yeah. I may post a picture of this tomorrow, so especially if you made it, let me know what you thought, and leave a comment that you came to the class.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any other last questions? We'll give everyone a moment. If you'd like, you can unmute yourself or you can put a question in the chat while we finish up here.
Thank you so much, Dan. I mean, such simple, beautiful ingredients have made, wow, what a spectacular dish.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Wow. It's spectacular. It's stunning. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's fun. And like I said, a lot of my stuff is a little more complicated or not. I don't want to say hard or complicated. It's more just like, it's not as much showcasing these like fresh, clean, simple ingredients. But I love doing a dish like this in a situation like this because it shows you don't need to use a ton of ingredients, and you could just like take your time and do these sort of like classic time-honored traditions like this and make something really special.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you again so much, Dan. This was a real beautiful afternoon autumn treat for everybody. So,
Great. Yeah,
applause. What a thank you so much.
of course. Thank you.